Thank you for joining me. My name is Daniel Dawson Gordon, and we're here to reveal a lost painting. A lost painting which is one of the most significant parts of art history. This discovery involves not only the incredible artist that painted this truly remarkable painting, but it involves all the great artists that we know as household names. The journey spans 500 years. It involves a painting that was painted in 1530 by one of the greatest masters in art history. His name was Correggio, Antonio Allegri da Correggio. He was the greatest, most wanted, admired painter that you could want in a collection. So if you look back in history at the greatest art collections that ever existed, the prize pieces at the very top of their collections was Correggio paintings. But we do not only have a Correggio painting here, we have the greatest work that he done. Correggio was an innovative, unique style of painting that set a trend throughout history. Everybody followed and admired Correggio. 500 years have passed since Correggio, but for more than 400 of them years, he was as a household name as we have now as Rembrandt and Leonardo. As much as I tell you now that Correggio is the greatest master of art history, he has unfortunately been long forgotten in the past century. So I'm not going to make out an artist that wasn't so famous is. Correggio was the most admired, demanded, famous artist of the last 500 years. His work wasn't hard to find like a Raphael or a Holbein. It was soft, and the magic of it was something else, and that's why the magic of it still resonates today. The softness, which is the sfumato on the edges of the work, the sensual depictions that he did were innovative, and it was like a bright light in art history that shone, that all the artists that followed took inspiration from. And a lot of works ever since to this very day were all inspired by the works of Correggio. There are key elements that come from his mythological works that have been placed within many artists' work through history. Reynolds, Turner, Rembrandt, Kuiper, Hogarth. It's all going to be in this documentary. So we're here to talk about a lost masterpiece. How did this story begin? Well, it was 2020. I'd already discovered a fantastic masterpiece by lovely Antoinetta Gonzalez by Fede Galizia. So I was now on the trail to find my next great masterpiece for my collection. And trailing through the internet, the vast auctions, and I come across a most peculiar painting. It looked so incredibly painted. It was, I won't forget it, it was actually confusing. How could you buy such an incredible painting? It was so good, and it had a Leonardo-esque to it. And so I purchased this painting, and there was a lot going on. It was poorly cleaned, and it had scars and wounds, and that's part of the allure is why I bought it, because it had questions, and it looked like a painting that would scare people, like, oh, it's damaged, it's too much, it's rough. It had a roughness to it, but it had, in hand of its roughness, it had such beauty, and there was something to it. So I got the painting, it arrived with me, and I mentioned to my conservationist that I know, is there anything they could tell me about this work? And straight away they mentioned That is the Cupid from the famous Venus Satyr Cupid in the Louvre by Correggio. So straight away I thought, oh right, so it appears I don't have a unique work, I have a copy. So I continued with my normal thing that I did with new paintings that I get, is I proceed with an X-ray, because an X-ray enables me to learn more. There's so much that from face value you can't see that an X-ray can show you. I got the X-ray done, and then a hand was revealed from the top of the painting. And all little fragments around the painting were embedded in this composition. This painting revealed that it was once part of a large painting, and a Venus had been cut out of the painting, and what we had was the Cupid, but little parts of the larger painting. A story is about to unfold here, because somebody's chosen to save these fragments for a reason. There's a significant reason why someone would go through the effort of saving these tiny fragments, and they was all overpainted. So they were hidden just to present this Cupid. So then I sent it off to the conservators and asked them to do some tests. My lady rang me up within a couple of days of having the painting, and she put some of the paint under the microscope, and she said to me, Daniel, you have something very special here. She said, you have a painting that has paint pigments that date from the exact same time as the original work, circa 1530, the early 16th century. What we can work out already straight away is on the appendix list of any copy of this painting, you most likely have the earliest copy of this painting in existence. You have a 16th century work without question of doubt, but one of the most earliest copies of this painting. So this was really interesting to hear. So whilst that was going on, I began deep research into Correggio and his mythological works. So what turns out is that he created a set of 6 mythological works, which is his Venus Satyr Cupid, the School of Love, the Ganymede, the Io, and then we have the other 2 partners, which is Danae and the Leader. So these mythological works, they are so important to art history. These are classed as the most famous, influential works that we know in art history. Everybody followed and admired these works. Everybody. So as I began to learn more about the mythological sequence, there is significant parts of history widely recorded that the mythological works, when they eventually landed into a French collection in the early 18th century, a mad Duke of Orleans, Louis, attacked some of the Correggio paintings. And in that list, he attacked a Leader painting, a Leader and a Swan, which is now in the Granvelle gallery in Germany. There's some X-ray analysis of that painting. And that painting shows how it was hacked and the Leader's head was destroyed. And we'll go into further detail later on in this documentary about this Leader painting. But her head was repainted. Suddenly, we're learning about paintings that were cut. That's a bit of a coincidence that I've got a painting that looks like it was hacked also. In this early research, I thought, well, that's not on the list, so surely mine's not to do with that. But what a coincidence, we've got a painting that relates to Correggio, and Correggio paintings were cut up during the Orleans collection. I then get a phone call from the art conservators a few weeks later that they've discovered the canvas that the painting is painted on is not a normal cross weave, it's not a twill weave, which is a even more sort of prestigious weave. It's actually a very rare patterned geometric weave, which is known as a damask. And this weave was been known to have originally been part of fancy tablecloths and was adopted in the 16th century by some of the greatest artists that we know. They've been seen in paintings by Titian. In his works, tablecloths, he's painted these specific details in the tablecloth, and these damask pattern weaves have been found in Titian's work also. And I recall during my investigations looking in the leader painting that I'd seen some x-ray details of this painting. It just so happens that damask weave that we've discovered in my painting is also in the leader painting that was cut up. Various types of patterned weave damask exist in the world. I think even as much as 200 have been discovered, but they're all slightly different patterns used by different artists. Even Correggio is known to have used pattern weaves. But this specific pattern has been found in 3 Correggio works, including the leader painting that has been hacked and cut up. So the next stage in the art conservation studio was to research the pigment flags of Correggio. So analysis and research was cross-referenced with the Vatican, the National Gallery of works by Correggio, and it turns out that all the pigment flags that Correggio was known to have used are identified in my painting. But not only a 10 out of 10 for the identification of Correggio pigments in this work, is a pigment that is so rare that it has been only found in 1 or 2 artists in history. And this rare pigment is called pleurocyte. Suddenly we've now got not only the flags of pigments that Correggio used, it may be that some other artists used these pigments, but these are the pigments in here that Correggio definitely used. But then within them pigments, we have one that's only ever been found in Correggio and 1 or 2 other artists in history. So we go back to the art conservators and they start scraping back the overpaint surrounding the Cupid, and we start revealing the actual details of the fragments. And then what we do is we'll get the Louvre version up and we tessellate these fragments of where they would have belonged in this larger version. We can see from the evidence of where they land that a core of this painting has been removed. So suddenly we have a cut painting, same as the leader was cut. But as we look further into the history of the Orleans collection, it turns out that the Duke cut up over 40 paintings. And it was the insanity of the Duke of Orleans, Louis, that took offence to the sensualness and eroticness of these paintings. He did it to a famous Io painting by Correggio, which was always regarded as a Correggio painting, and after its repair, when they repaired its face in later years, was still believed to be a Correggio painting until it went missing in the early 20th century. And we can look deeper into the collection that was prior the Orleans collection that was sold to the Duke of Orleans, and we can look at the Orleans collection inventory, and we look at the collection that was sold to him. The Orleans collection inventory wasn't catalogued until after the mutilations. So it's missing all of the destroyed paintings, and some of the paintings that survived are in there, such as the leader. And some scholars have said, oh, the leader took the worst hit. Well, in fact, the leader took one of the softest hits because it survived. And we look back into the collection before it, which is the Old Ilsaki collection, and we find more Correggio works that actually made the full mythological collection. And we find there was a Venus Satyr Cupid in that collection that when the Orleans collection was drawn up, was no longer listed. But in the collection that was sold to the Orleans, it was in there. What we have got here is evidence that suggests Correggio painted a variant set of works. What do I mean by variant? Well, variant could be classed as the same work again, but slightly different. So you could be painting the same work again, but with different colour robes or different colour objects, or an additional object, or a different slight movement, minus a character or with an addition of a character. So a variant is a wonderful thing because it's a great and enhanced version of the original work. Variants are wonderful things, but a copy is quite a crude thing. It's just a copy. And great artists didn't really do copies because that's just not the done thing. What they did was this thing called variants. So Leonardo is a great example of variants, and quite particularly one of his greatest works that he did, which is The Virgin on the Rocks, where we have a version in London's The National Gallery, and we have another version in the Louvre in Paris. And one is a variant of the other, and he's got a slight different styling and a few different areas which has variant details. But I could choose many variants that could be shown as examples, because all artists did variants, and copies are done by people who are admiring works and duplicating them. So a copy is how it sounds, it's a duplication. But a variant is like the Mark II. You take the work and you think, well, this is how I can improve it, or what I wish I did do, and you do the better version. So it's the variant that usually is the most famous and the greater work over the original. And what we're beginning to prove here is the existence of variants by Correggio. But this is no new thing that we've just come up with. Through art history, and you look into the data, it's always been recorded that these other variants existed. It's only in this last century that this has been forgotten. I don't even know why, because the evidence before my discovery is all there. So where it all begins in the deep academic research is there was an art critic that defined art history, and his name was Giorgio Vasari. And there's only a few bits of information that we can use to discuss and learn about Correggio in his early days. And it so happens that Giorgio Vasari wrote that Correggio was commissioned by Federico II to paint a set of mythological works as gifts for Charles V, whilst at the time Federico already had a set of mythological works by Correggio. So these works have been listed by Vasari as a Leda and a Venus. But in these later years, even the past 200 years, scholars have questioned this Venus painting for Charles V, because the famous Louvre Venus painting went through Federico and Mantua and went on a different journey as the works that went through Charles V. But when you look at Charles V's collection and the journey of them works, you see a Venus Satyr Cupid exists. So as I begin to deeper research, I've located a Venus Satyr Cupid painting all the way through history, from the Charles V collection all the way through his assistant Granvelle, who had the greatest collection of 16th century that deserves wide recognition. His collection had Raphaels, His collection's even recorded as to have had the Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. And if you look at the Mona Lisa's provenance history, there's a massive gap in that history, and exactly in Granvelle's collection is the gap of where it would have belonged. And that's another story, but that shows how important the Granvelle collection was. And this painting is now being recognised by Correggio, proves even more so the importance of that collection. So then as we proceed, it then went on to the Rudolph II collection. Then it went on to Queen Christina of Sweden. Her collection, through descendants, ended up in the Livio Odescalchi collection in Rome, which then after his death and inheritance finally made its way to the Duke Orleans, where the mutilations happened. And the paintings were saved by the superintendent of the collection, Antoine Coypel. And Antoine Coypel saved what he could and repaired, but this little Cupid would have been saved by him. Let's go back and look at the painting in greater detail. Here you can see the painting in its original condition, where it had been left in long-term storage in a barn. From what I hear, the lady was in her late 90s, and as long as you know, it had been in her family. It had been believed to have been gifted to her family from a Huguenot family. It had been handed down as a family heirloom, and it was put to auction, and it was bought by the dealer prior to me in its dirty, uncleaned state. This dealer had it cleaned, and this is the condition it arrived with me. It reveals the scars and the wounds, but all the overpaint is still there, and it still needs another clean. So a lot was revealed. I don't know the answer why he chose to sell the painting, but all I can make an assumption of is that, hold on a minute, this painting's a mess. It's cut, it's got scars, it's wounded. Let's chuck it to auction. So then I purchased the painting, and when I think back, I bought it down to the pound. It was like, I think I paid something like £1,227.30 or something like that. It was something ridiculous like that. So that I just managed to obtain the painting. But I noticed its clear quality. It had some Leonardo-esque look to it, but the damage made me ask questions. So we have it x-rayed, we reveal its hand, we start understanding more all about its fragments, especially on the infrared. The infrared was very revealing. So we had to start scraping back the overpaint. So it was carefully done over many days with a little blade, and we revealed the flesh of the Venus. We revealed more parts of the Venus's legs. We revealed a bit of the quiver. We actually revealed a top part of the body of the satyr. So it was one of the top studios in England, and sort of no expense was spared to make sure the conservation work and revealing this painting and the care was done at the best that I could instigate. Here we can see the most wondrous 16th century pigments. As we zoom in and look at these under the microscope, they are artworks in themselves. They remind me of like supernovas, galaxies, but here we can see the mineral itself, pleurocyte, a shiny silvery particle. It's a wonderful mineral. What a spectacular thing to find that. Here we've got a wonderful cyber side of my Cupid next to the Louvre Cupid. And you may think on first instance, oh, it's very different to the Louvre painting. And that's a fair assumption to make straight away. But in response to that initially, you can say, well, a variant shouldn't be the same. Also, the variant was painted a few years after the original Lou version, and all the way through Correggio's career, you can see his style becoming more enhanced and changing. You can see it, his style changes all the way through his history of works. But even saying that, I don't feel this work is much different from the Lou version at all. Because the Lou version is not been cleaned for a long time, so you can't see the flesh colour as you see it in my painting. It's very yellowy. But what you can see is a very similar craquelure and fragmentation of the work. You can see the strokes and technique in the ear is almost identical. But most importantly of all, the outline of how Correggio does his works is the soft sfumato blend of paints, and that soft edge is his signature trademark. And the way the eye and the brushstrokes are just pulled softly and gently, we can clearly see a more defined cheek, and it may be a more enhanced, significant work than the original. But this variant work closely resembles his technique, along with everything else we have already. So then what we did and proceeded to go with is removing the lining from the painting. But this painting has been relined twice. So we remove one lining, then underneath is another lining which is holding all the fragments. So it was most likely Charles Antoine Coypel that saved this painting and placed these fragments on top of a lining, bedded them down, then overpainted them to save the Cupid and present it as a wonderful painting on its own. So now we've revealed this original weave, that the canvas that the Cupid is laying on. And if you look now, you can see this is so rare, this is mind-blowing. We can see this prestigious, unique, rare damask weave pattern which matches the Leader and the Swan by Correggio in the Gamalda gallery. And we can see the cut wounds where it was hacked with what I can assume is some very large Rambo knife. To show you the scale of this Cupid, because so far I'm explaining to you it's a fragment, and a fragment always seems like a remnant small piece of something. But in fact this was a very large painting. And here in scale, alongside the Mona Lisa, it's a very similar size and proportion, but it's larger. So here we can see, for context, we have laid out the fragments digitally on a plain weave and placed the fragments where they would have belonged in the original composition. This is side by side with the Lou version. And we've overlaid the pieces on the Lou version to also show how the painting would have once looked. So we go back to the painting that I mentioned when I was discussing the mythological works by Correggio, and that is the Leader and the Swan. And here we can see a side by side of the Leader and the Swan painting along with an X-ray showing how this painting was cut. So the black areas are where a different newly introduced canvas weave has been used, but the rare damask weave you can see all around. And unfortunately her head was repainted not as it once originally was. And we can see old copies of this original work that show her head truly how she once looked. And that's in the Prado, and I used that throughout my presentation because it's a fantastic example of seeing what she really looked like. But we bounce between that version and this version because they both have attributes that we want to discuss in our research. So as we go further down, looking at closer versions of this X-ray in the damask, We also can see close-ups of the leader painting where you can see the damask pattern protruding through the painting. It's quite funny because there's been examples of art critics mentioning why a coarse weave was used. Well, they're just seeing it pushing through as a coarse weave, but it's not just a coarse weave, it's a patterned weave is what you're seeing. But it's not one set pattern weave that's used in history. There's different patterns and different designs, and the different designs have been found with different artists, and this design has specifically been seen to be used in 3 works by Correggio. And you know what? For any painting that's catalogued in history with this rare or a rare style of geometric pattern, even if it's a different pattern, none of them can be seen with the naked eye because they've all been relined. Mine's the only one currently in the world, as rare as it is, that you can see it with your naked eye at the moment, because I haven't relined the painting yet, which is a story on itself, how we display it. But at the moment, the canvas on the rear is naked and we can see it with our own eyes. And there's even traces on the back of where the artist, Correggio, has wiped his brush off, and we've found little pigments from the front of the painting wiped on the back of the canvas. It's wonderful. This is not for the faint-hearted, this little video clip. This is the conservator removing the later linings. It's the way you do it. She's not taking any prisoners, and this is when the damask was truly revealed. So through deep research, we're going to touch on some of the owners of the painting up until its demise. We have evidence to prove that Federico II of Mantua, the Gonzaga, commissioned this work for Charles V, which then landed in the hands of Antoine Perronneau de Granvelle, inherited by his descendant and nephew Francois de Granvelle, was purchased by Rudolph II, was stolen by Queen Christina of Sweden, inherited by a close friend, Deso Azzolino, inherited by his nephew, Pompeo Azzolino, then purchased by Don Livio Odescalchi. There's a pattern here. The purchaser or the person that acquires the painting doesn't sell the painting. It's the inherited party that sells the painting. Maybe my descendants will sell my collections, but my collections I tend to not sell. But then we go from Livio Odescalchi to his descendant, Baldassare Odescalchi. That was then purchased by Philippe II, the Duke of Orleans, and then it was cut and attacked by Monsieur Louis the Duke of Orleans, and then the paintings were trashed then. They were diminished. Kuipel obtained them somehow, he saved them, but this painting being attacked was the most prominent work of the collection. I will show you soon that this is one of the most greatest artworks in history throughout all the collections, how influential it was, specifically this version. Not just the composition, the Venus Satyr Lou version and my version, and that just composition is so famous. I'm going to show you the specific details that was within this variant version and was part of a mythological collection of Correggio's that were the most famous ones in history. So we have a timeline of a painting's provenance history for 500 years. We don't just have a defined provenance history of 500 years, which is more than any other painting of its age. We have the greatest work in history. We have the most science analysis, almost as it were DNA proof that we've got a Correggio work. We've got paint pigments and samples that only relate to Correggio. We have a painting that was attacked the same. We have ink pattern weave. We have stylistic matches. And on top of that, we have famous great artists that witnessed this painting and painted the unique details within this work in their paintings. That these paintings that I speak of are some of the most famous works in history that are full of mystery, that no one has been able to solve the code of these works. And I am telling you straight up, this is no opinion or idea. I have conclusively deciphered these most famous works. This research discovery, which has a ripple effect of discoveries of all these works I keep mentioning, is so significant. This is going to be a benchmark in itself in history. Right now you're witnessing a benchmark in history. I don't know why it's not been done before, but the responsibility is landing with me. There are many points that we will consistently touch on that prove the existence of variants by Correggio. There is a document reference in the archives that Federico, after the death of Correggio, Correggio died quite early in life, and Federico, who had some of the mythological works, who is recorded by Vasari as commissioning Correggio to do some additional mythological works for Charles V. Well, there's a document that after Correggio's death, Federico challenged the Correggio family for the cartoons that he believes that he's entitled to and that he wants. And he made a few attempts to retrieve these cartoons. Cartoons are tracings, so they are the preliminary drawings for making copies or variant works. So if you did a painting and you was going to make a variant, you would do a cartoon of it, and then you would duplicate it, as I say, would be a copy, but you'd put the figures in and then you'd put different adjustments around it to make it a variant. But you would use certain parts of it that would be transferred because it is the original composition but changed slightly. To take that from one to another and make them adjustments, you had cartoons. And so all these great artists had cartoons that they used to create these variants. And we even have a reference that a set of mythological cartoons were in the Correggio estate that Federico was fully aware of and felt entitled to. The document tells us that the existence of them. But it tells something that he really wanted them and needed them. And I think if he was satisfied with the works that he had and the work that Correggio did, and the sad death of Correggio, I think there would be no need to chase and obtain these cartoons. But because of the fame and significance of these works, and Federico likely was missing a couple of the works that he needed copies doing that may have gone to Charles V, Federico was most likely without a couple of the mythologicals, which we've got all evidence to prove that that was why he so greatly was in desperation for these cartoons. So this is another significant point that proves the existence of variants, because that's what the cartoons would have been used for. There's official documentation that the cartoons existed and they relate to the mythological works and not his religious or general works, but specifically the mythological works. Such a big, strong lump of evidence that it's just overwhelming. Even mentioned by a famous Correggio scholar who has since passed, Cecil Gould, wrote amazing books on Correggio. The factual information documented in his books I found so relevant. But saying that, there is a few minor bits that I would like to challenge, and I feel that I've corrected and updated and proved the truth more so. So there's a couple little mistakes in there, which is part of questioning people before you. On the whole, I think he's done amazing work, and it's the best work available in books that you can buy on Correggio. Gould even quoted that having given 4 pictures of the loves of Jupiter to the emperor, Federico may have wanted some of the same works for himself, is why he chased for these cartoons. So another very big early point in defining the story of the creation of this Correggio mythological work is Vasari. So Vasari wrote about a Leda and a Venus was commissioned for Charles V by Federico, and it mentions that the Venus is in a wonderful landscape with wonderful golden locks of hair and flesh only that Correggio could have painted. But when I quote Vasari, I've quoted him from old books and histories and from the earliest documentations. I've reviewed so many of this Vasari quote on Correggio, and what it appears is he 100% mentions a Leda and a Venus. We know that the Leda painting is not the Venus painting. We know the difference between a Leda and a Venus. And what he mentions is specific details, that the Venus is in a wonderful landscape with golden locks of hair. And we know that the Leda painting doesn't have this wonderful golden locks of hair. So he's specifically mentioning the Venus painting, which, if you look at the mythological works, that is the most amazing set of hair and wonderful picture of all. And Charles V, certainly, that the king of all of Europe at the time, would not have been without the painting. Certainly not. And especially when they're being commissioned for him. So he wouldn't have been without that painting. We know that. But then he mentions a few other details that have all sort of got blended together in that he mentions a limpid stream, which relates to the Io painting, which Cecil Gould agrees with. He also mentions some cupids touching the points of their arrows, which relates to the Danae painting. So we've got a reference to the Danae painting, we've got a reference to the Io painting, we've got a reference to the Leda painting, and we've got a reference to a Venus painting. So that's 4 works, which doesn't mean it was a definitive 4. It means there could have been 5 works. It could have been the 6, but there's a 4 works that is mentioned. And what we have throughout Correggio scholars in the past 300 years is trying to understand what Vasari is saying. So Vasari was there of the time. Vasari was a great artist himself, and he'd painted Venus paintings and Leda paintings, and he knows the difference between a Leda and a Venus. But the point we have with a lot of scholars trying to make sense of Vasari's words, because the evidence of the lost Venus no longer existed when all these reviews that I'm going to explain, they have come to the conclusion that Vasari's wrong. He must not mean a Venus. He must have meant the Danae. And but they all do cover themselves and challenge themselves to say, but if he must have meant the Danae, which we are believing he's doing, still that the Danae is in a bedroom and not a landscape. They sort of try to question Vasari that he's wrong. Then with their answer, they also explain how it doesn't make sense. So the whole addition of what they're bringing to the table and then confusing everything seems to me is completely pointless. But what's happened from that is scholars have fed off this information, and then them ideas have become the narrative. And that's has been taught that, oh yes, Vasari's completely wrong. He makes a double mistake. He actually means a Danae, not a Venus. And that's that. And, you know, where we have the evidence of a Venus painting that has the exact same damask weave as the leader. We have a Venus painting that was cut exactly the same as the leader. We have a Venus painting that we've tracked through all of history in the same collections all the way through back to this very Vasari document that mentions Federico commissioned a Venus and a leader for Charles V. The leader painting is a partner to the Danae. So the Danae would have been done. There's no denying that Vasari is not mentioned Danae. But to rule out the Venus and supersede its Danae only across the board, whereas he's mentioning a leader separately, he's mentioning a Venus. So they're completely different paintings. And then he's mentioning different specifics that all attribute to each one of the works. The limpid stream, as in the IO, he mentions, again, carnations and golden locks of hair and wonderful flesh, and in a landscape, a Venus. So the evidence is, it's not a hypothesis or an idea, it's unequivocal evidence. The original data says the Venus was done. The scientific analysis proves the Venus that we've got was a Correggio. The history and provenance proves it. The stylistic qualities, everything about it. Some of the greatest paintings in the world in various museums all come from the Orleans collection. The Orleans collection is actually known as the Queen Christina collection. The entirety of the Christina collection landed in the Orleans collection eventually. But it isn't just the Orleans collection, is the Christina collection. The Christina collection was the entirety of the Rudolph collection. And the Rudolph collection was a big proportion of the Granvelle collection. And the Granvelle collection was a lot of the Charles V collection. The transcendence of this grand collection, some might have been lost, some might have been added, but the bulk of the Orleans collection is not an individual collection as you would think of, but it is a bulk of a collection that's passed through history. So what you can do is look at the Authentication collection that was sold to the Orleans. So in my left hand I've got the Authentication collection, in my right hand I have the Orleans collection. But the Orleans collection inventory was wrote in 1727, which is approximately 5-6 years after the mutilations. So if you think of this inventory is minus mutilated paintings, this inventory is the full collection. If you overlay them, you should be able to look through the fishing net, as it were, what ones could possibly be the lost, damaged works in history. And I've done this. Let's look at the Correggios, because when I say this body of grand art collection that passed through history, that is the same as this body of Correggio collection. There's a body of Correggio works that passed within that grand collection all the way through these hands. All I want to do is show you the Orleans Correggio collection and the works before the mutilations and the works after. So if we look into the Orleans, we can learn some incredible stuff. So we'll start off with the Venus Satyr Cupid, Charles V version we call it. Rather than the variant, we'll call it the Charles V version. Here we have a painting of this lost work and an engraving of this lost work. And both of these depictions have variant details compared to the Louvre version, and these are complete evidence to show you that this other version existed in history. So here we have my work before the mutilations, and then we have what was left, the Cupid. It's a beautiful painting. Now, this is one of the most important parts of evidence and deciphering my painting's existence, as mine is the variant version. We're going to look at the differences between the Venus Satyr Cupid in the Louvre and the lost variant version, which is mine. So we start off here. This is the Louvre version. Here is a drawing of the Louvre version, an early drawing. And here is an old engraving of the Louvre version. They're quite consistent in how the satire looks and the tree formation, even behind the satire and in front of the satire. On the right side, we don't start off with the Louvre version, we start off with the variant version, which is what is left of the variant version. And what is left is my Cupid. And my Cupid is the remnants of the original variant. But instead of a drawing, we have a painting of the variant version. But then we have an engraving of the variant version. So here on the left, we have 3 pictures of the Louvre version, which includes the Louvre version. So we have a painting of the Louvre version, a drawing of the Louvre version, an engraving of the Louvre version. On the right, we have the original variant version, what is left of it, my Cupid. We have instead of a drawing, we have a painting of the variant version, and we have an engraving of the variant version. We can now look at the differences between both the works. We'll jump to some core differences first. We have in the tree area, we have a forked Y-shaped tree branch, and in the Louvre version, that's not there. In the Venuses, in the variant, I believe there is a different colour sheet used compared to the sheet in the Louvre version. So the variant version has a more greenier colour than the richer blue that is in the Louvre version. So we're starting to see variant details. Now when we look at the satire, this painting of the variant version shows the satire quite different in his profile, that you can see both eyes, and in the Louvre version you can see less of his ear and less of his eyes. Basically you can just see one eye on side profile, and his chin is not as exaggerated as it is in the other version. So I believe the variant version is a stronger defined image. And if you look at the torch, we have this different colour and sort of different styling of flame, whereas the Louvre version is more flamey. But let's go in a closer inspection now and look at the differences, because the William van Heck version has always been a question in history, because this is not the Charles I version. This is another version, and it's significant to be painted in such detail, and it is the most showcased one in the William van Heck collection, depicted in many of his works. So let's move forward and look at the differences more. So here in the drawing, you can see a similar trees in the background of the satire, consistently with the Louvre version and the engraving. Whereas with my remnants left, you can see the positions of the fragments, but the trees behind is slightly different, as in the engraving, and the satires are slightly different. So on the right we see the variant satires, and on the left we see the earliest version by Correggio. But we can see his hair's different, he's muscular, it's different, and his face is different. Close up of the faces. We've only got the Van Heck version to look at the variant and the engraving, but we can see they are very different to the Louvre version and the Louvre version engravings and drawings. Now look at the Cupids in a whole. The Cupids on the left, the Louvre version, the Louvre engraving. But if you look at my cheeky little Cupid, it looks very much more like the Van Heck version. and the engraving of the variant version. But they are both quite different to the Louvre version. Even Venus's nose seems to be more protruding. Here we've got another lineup of the Cupid, and we've framed the Louvre version and the Van Eyck version proportionally with the fragment that I have, and another side by side of the 3 Cupid heads alone, just the 3. And what I do like is this version now coming up is the flame. The first version is the Louvre, the second version is mine, and the third version is the Van Eyck version. As you can see, clearly the Van Eyck version is depicting my version and is not depicting the Louvre version. It's very different. And it's a match to my version in colour and style and design. We can see that the quiver on mine looks very much more like the Van Eyck version than the Louvre version. Something amazing that I found early on in my research, very early. Very grateful to the Louvre for sharing with me the X-ray of the Venus Satyr Cupid. It gets a bit embarrassing now because I've discovered a load of pentimenti and underpainting in the X-ray of the Venus Satyr Cupid that has never been wrote or recorded anywhere. So I can only say this is a world discovery, and that if you look in the area of the satyr's head, there is another smaller scaled version of the satyr's head, but showing both eyes. So it's more frontal than the variant version we know, but shows that basically in the variant version, Correggio has returned to showing both eyes in show of the satyr, but maybe not as much. So he's thought, well, he didn't like the side profile as much and has gone with both eyes on show. And if you look here, you can see his eyes and his nose and his mouth, and it's pretty much, he's got a bit more of a large chin going on. You can see a smaller scale Venus in the lower part, and we can also see in another area she was in an opposite position and a smaller scale, but for some reason or another he nuked that work and just overpainted with a larger scale composition. But this is evidence towards showing also that Correggio had in mind the satyr with both eyes on show in his composition, and he returned to that idea in the variant. Even got a close version of the variant satyr within the Louvre version. That's a good one. I pat myself on the back for that one. So here is the provenance history of the Venus Satyr Cupid in the Louvre, and here's the Charles V version variant provenance history. All recorded, all listed as a Correggio, all of its existence, and modern day scholars have gone with the idea that it never existed because as far as they were concerned it doesn't exist anymore. But I have it, well, a large part of it. I have the Cupid and the fragments all around, so we know it existed, and Vasari was right. We have the DNA, we have the pigments, we have all that we need to prove more than any painting in the world could exist. We have so much. Now we move on to the next Correggio work. So we have the School of Love, which is in the National Gallery. But the School of Love in the National Gallery is not the Orleans version. This is the evidence of a variant existed, because the School of Love in the Orleans collection didn't get attacked because she is not a sensual erotic picture. She's a mother proud of her son Cupid, with Mercury instructing him. This is again a variant version. It has variant details different from the National Gallery School of Love. So here we've got engravings in the Orleans collection, and I'll give you a heads up of the main variant detail with the Orleans version as to the National Gallery version. The difference is the modesty. The Orleans version, the genitalia was covered with the blanket, whereas the National Gallery version, it's not covered. In Correggio history, when it talks of the Orleans mutilations, it mentions the Io was cut, it mentions the leader was cut, But they all mention a weird thing. They say, but we don't know why the Danae wasn't cut. Because obviously the Danae is quite a sensual erotic picture to her face as she's being happily raped by Zeus in a golden shower. Well, the Danae was cut. There's no sense or reason why any book should ever say the Danae wasn't cut. So in this Grand Orleans Sale, when it was all disbanded and sold, there is 2 Danaes listed. 1 copy and 1 original by Correggio. And the original is listed as being mutilated and cut and repaired. And then there's another one which is listed as perfect. You revert back to the collection that was before the Orleans, that was sold to the Orleans collection. You look through them inventories and you see there is 2 Danae paintings listed. And in that listing, they both have sizes. And bear in mind, the Danae painting is the partner to the leader painting. One Danae painting has the exact same size as the leader painting, but one, very slightly, has slightly different sizes. Forgive me for memory, but it's either slightly bit bigger or slightly bit smaller. But we could say, well, vice versa, some of them could have been trimmed, this, that and the other. That can happen. But one is listed as a copy and one is listed as an original. And it turns out that the Danae in the Borghese, which is now regarded as the Correggio Danae, has the same sizes as the one that has slightly different sizes. And the other one has the exact same sizes as the leader now, is the one which likely is the cut version. But the cut version would only have been the one that was on display. And if you had 2 Danaes, one a copy and one real, you'd only have displayed the real one. And the other Correggios that got attacked, as in the true leader, which is now in the Gamalda Gallery, was cut and attacked. Its part of the painting is the Danae. And we have found the Danae in historical archives as coming out of the Orleans collection as cut. This is a cut painting. And then we found it going through many hands all the way up to the 19th century, through the 18th to the 19th century, as this is the famous Correggio work that was cut and attacked. And the version that wasn't cut, which is now in the Borghese, was originally imported to Italy as a copy. And what the story of that painting is that the excuse is that it was imported as a copy because to save maybe on tax reasons, because then it was worth less. Also, it was originally known as a copy, but then later received by scholars as, oh, yeah, we actually realise now this is not a copy, this is an original Correggio. But bear in mind the cut one has disappeared off the face of the earth, and the leader has this damask weave, same as my Venus has a damask weave, but the Danae in the Borghese doesn't have that damask weave. And that is a partner painting to the leader. And the Danae painting in the Borghese hasn't been cut, but we've got evidence coming out of the Orleans collection of 2 Danaes, one a cut version, and even more strange is Cecil Gould has wrote in the history of the appendix list of the Danae painting, he's wrote a list of copies, and he's writ, in the 1800s, some man proclaimed that he owns the original Danae by Correggio, not the Borghese one, and it was cut up in the Orleans collection, and he has the original cut version. And Cecil Gould follows with, but this could not possibly be true. Full stop. How bizarre. So bizarre. Can I bring more evidence to back up what I'm suggesting? I thought you'd never ask. We have engravings of the Danae painting in the Orleans collection, which would have been the main Correggio one on display. We have a matching engraving when it was in the Authentication collection. So, and other engravings. So we have real life depictions of the Authentication collection. We have an engraving of it, and we have an engraving of the Orleans version. And both these versions are very well detailed matching engravings. And they have details in them that are not in the Borghese Danae painting. And so I'm not here to disprove the Borghese's Danae painting, but what I am showing you is definitely that another version existed, but to be honest, that was the real Correggio version. And you know what? That's out there still, and that's in a private collection somewhere. And I am certain it will have a damask weave. So you check your collections in wherever you are in the world holding this Danae painting. I have all the evidence to prove you hold the original Correggio painting, and you're out there. And I'm not going to hold any information back and try and hunt these paintings down. I want the truth to come to light. So why would there have been two Danae paintings in the Orleans collection? Because that comes from the Aldo Scalchi collection. Why would he have obtained two paintings of the Danae Correggio? Because that is the collection that came from Christina. Why did she end up with two? Because she'd stolen from Rudolph II. Why did Rudolph have two Danae paintings? Because it's recorded he had one commissioned because he hadn't had it obtained yet. And then when he obtained it, he had the original. So the copy would have been in stores all the way, and the main glamorous best version on display. And that's why in the Orleans collection, the cut one was the original. We have all the evidence of the cut one recorded in many collections after the Orleans, so we know it exists. We have engravings that show the curtains and drapery with such fantastic detail, different from the Borghese version. The cloud is different. Her face is slightly different. There's a lot of differences in detail. Even in the window, as we look out to the window, the house is different in the Borghese version than it is in the engravings. And when you look into deep information about the Borghese Danae, there's a lot of challenges for its authenticity. Let's hope that the original work can come out of hiding. And because the Danae in the Borghese is so beautiful and wonderful, and it's the only real close version of the original, there's no reason why everyone's just gone, well, oh, that's fantastic painting. I can tell you that all the evidence suggests that this is a copy and the original needs to be found still. This version was not attacked because this was the copy in the stores, whilst the original was on display with the other works that got attacked and was recorded as attacked and is recorded through the history, and most definitely has the damask weave, as it's the partner to leader that has a damask weave. There's no reason for the part of the painting in the Borghese to have a different weave. So here, pre-mutilations, here we have the Monsieur Duke Orleans collection depicting the leader, and this engraving shows the leader done before it was mutilated, because that's the style of the face before it was changed. As we see on the attacked version, her face is slightly different. And let's bring up the Prado version. This is an exquisite copy of the leader, and this is the most true way of looking at the painting of what it once looked like, rather than the actual Correggio leader, because it wasn't cut and it shows the original details in the area where it was damaged. So let's continue through the Correggio collection, there was the Holy Night. Now this painting goes with saying it wasn't cut. We know it wasn't cut, and it was a holy religious painting. There's no reason for it to be cut. So that stayed the same. But the Noli Tangier was religious painting, not attacked. So here we have another mythological that will go into great detail like we did with the Danae. And this version is the Orleans version, pre-mutilations, engravings. We can see, looks very much like the Vienna version, but she has a different face. Now, after the attack, it was repaired. And just like the leader, her face is slightly changed because Correggio didn't paint it. Another artist painted it, an 18th century artist. And here we see a black and white engraving of that painting. We actually then see in the centre of the attacked versions a 19th century painting that is a copy of the variant version, which in fact I own, and that is the only solid depiction that we have of this lost work, because there's a photograph of it here in black and white on the end, and this painting was held next to Leda in the Gamalda gallery, but around 1936 it disappeared before World War II rather than it was lost in World War II and looted. So it went missing, and it's missing to this day, but there was some records on the Lost Art database that it turned up in an auction in the 90s at Christie's. But if it turned up, where did it end up? I don't know. But again, this painting was recorded in Correggio books as an original Correggio work. So we had this collection of heads, which was listed as by Correggio. It's now been re-attributed to a work after Correggio, but by the Carracci, and most likely Annibale Carracci. That's who they believe it's by, and I can go along with that. So this is how it was, and it's still the same now. This painting, if I could have a painting that I don't own or is lost to the world, would be this. I don't know why, I gravitate to it very much so, and it's called the Muleteers, and it was believed to be painted for a sign for an inn, maybe an Italian inn by Correggio, you know, like a pub sign. And it's depicted through history, it's in many engravings, and I've traced it through in the 18th century in England and after the Orleans sale, but then it's disappeared. And that wasn't attacked, it's not a sensual erotic image. I love this picture, and I believe I'm going to find it one day, or at least it's going to come out into the world somehow or another. I will track it down. Just somebody's got a picture of a donkey, an old one that's very dirty, and it's passed through their family and nobody has a clue what it is. But I will spot that painting a mile away if it ever lands in my eyesight. You need to have an awareness of all these works, because these are the Correggio works that pass through the collections. And when we start looking at artists that see these collections and put Correggio attributes in their works, there's signals to this pool of Correggio works, because it was that body of collection that they were seeing. So it's the Madonna and the basket. It's a family picture. It's religious. It's not a sensual erotic picture. Pre-mutilations is the engraving that shows you in the Orleans collection. And in its present day form now, not attacked, which is in the National Gallery. So here we have Duke Valentine, which was attributed at the time to Correggio. and has now been reattributed to Dawson, who was of the time of Correggio, and some works vice versa have been misattributed over time. But again, not a sensual erotic picture, but at the time was a Correggio painting, and it wasn't attacked. And here we have a Correggio work of a young boy, not attacked. Wonderful picture, this one. So there we have the Orleans collection of Correggios, but what I've brought to the table is the Venus Satyr Cupid that was once in there, that in modern books is new information. That's what I've brought new to academia, and also the evidence that the Danae in the Borghese is very much likely a copy, but certainly the real prestige original Correggio is out there in the world at the moment, and that was the cut version. And when it gets x-rayed, when it's found, we'll see the damage. So here we're going to show the known Correggio works and the existence of variants, okay? So side by side. Below we have the School of Love, which is an early work that was done. Later we have the known Venus Satyr Cupid, which wasn't done at the same time. There's slight difference in his style of work. And then we have the pair of Io and Ganymede, and we have the Danae. But this Danae, I don't believe is an original Correggio work. The School of Love, I believe, had a variant that was in the Orleans collection, and could quite possibly be a work that I've tracked to the Brückenpfahl in Romania. But again, the Brückenpfahl version in Romania may be a copy of the variant, but shows her genitalia area covered with a blanket as opposed to exposed. That's the variant detail. The Venus Satyr Cupid variant version is depicted here in a painting from a Kunstdame painting, which is a collection, a painting of paintings, and that was done by William van Eyck. And this has variant details. Specifically, the satire is slightly showing both eyes as opposed to just a side profile. The tree section to the right shows a forked tree, and the tree area is very different to the Venus Satyr Cupid in the Louvre. We have the Lost Io painting, which is a wider proportion to the Io in Vienna. And this is an actual black and white image before it went missing. We have a Ganymede version that I found in Bordeaux. I have evidence of the Danae painting, and I have evidence of the leader painting. I show the black and white leader because that shows you in its original depiction, and this is the actual engraving in New Orleans. Here is the Danae engraving of the Orleans, and they are part of the pictures. So them two pictures I show as the two originals. This leader does exist. The leader in the Gamalda gallery is the original leader, and I don't believe it is a variant. I believe it is the original leader, which was commissioned for Charles V. I believe that Charles V had the Danae and the leader, which is recorded, is fine. But we can see that Federico did not have the leader and the Danae. That's why challenge for the cartoons. Okay, so the School of Love versions. So here we can see a drawing that was done by Richard Cooper, where she's got a sheet covering her genitalia. Here in the Orleans collection, we can see it sort of exaggerated, but the blanket covers her genitalia. Here we have the Brückenpfahl version, which proportionately matches the Orleans version, and it matches the drawing. She has a broader head and she has a blanket covering her genitalia. I believe that this is the original Correggio in Brückenpfahl, but if it isn't, it is a copy of the original version of the variant. So down here, the same artist, Richard Cooper, who's recorded as seeing both versions in some documents I retrieved from an archive in Scotland. So on this drawing, we see that her modesty is on show, and her face looks more like this engraving, as again like the National Gallery version, which is here. So here we see the depiction of the School of Love in the National Gallery, and above we have the variant version, which would have been the Granvelle version, recorded in the Granvelle collection, and in the all the way through Rudolph, Christina, Dawson and Orleans, the top version. So a few little close-up details. We see the variant, she has a broader head, her modesty is covered, and there's finer details within the hat and all over the picture, but the variant has a boxed quiver, whereas the School of Love in the National Gallery has, its quiver is very faded, but the drawing even shows that. The drawing shows the quiver like almost in no existence, whereas the variant version shows the quiver being shown on the bottom left of the picture. I'm not saying that the School of Love in the National Gallery never had a quiver, but you can see it's very faded, very tired. We can look here on the left, her exposed genitalia area, and on the right, she's covered up. We can see the faces are very similar in the drawings on the right, and the faces on the left are very similar to each other. So here we're differentiating the two different versions. One a variant, which was the more famous version that we'll show, because that was part of that great grand collection that was that big bulk all through history. Whereas this School of Love version had a different history, and that spent some time with Charles I before his head got cut off and the collection was sold back off. So look at these close-ups of the faces. On the right, we have engravings of the Orleans version, we have the drawing, and we have the Brookenville version. But here on the left, we have an engraving and the National Gallery version and the drawing. So look at the Richard Cooper drawings, the difference in them, and look at the School of Love in the National Gallery and the Brookenville version. You can see the differences. So this is the School of Love versions, and we'll look at some other close-ups in the differences in the versions. You can see that the rock formation is slightly different throughout the first version and the variant commission. There's subtle differences in his boot area, as you see on the variant version, the way that the lace is done up, and if we had the Brookenville cleaned, we should be able to see the colour differences more so, because there are some colour differences. So here's a good one, the Richard Cooper letters here. So here he explains that this picture was in the Palazzo Duca Bracciano, which is the Odelscalchi collection, which is the Orleans version. And then there's sort of a gap, and then it says at present in the Duke of Alba's collection at Madrid. Well, the Duke of Alba's version is the London version, but the Bracciano version is the Brookenville version. So the Orleans version is the Bracciano version in Rome, and the Duke of Alba's version is the London version. So two versions are mentioned here by Richard Cooper, and Richard Cooper's drawn both versions. But what is really interesting as well is that he mentions Venus has wings in this picture. Why does he mention that Venus has wings in this picture? If it was a soul picture, you wouldn't go, the Venus has wings in this picture. You say it in contrary to another painting. The Venus has wings in this picture because he would have seen the Venus Satyr Cupid version, which the Venus doesn't have wings in. And there's a bit of evidence later that shows the difference of them two Venus paintings, as one's a winged Venus and one's a non-winged Venus. But he makes a mention here that Venus has wings in this picture, as opposed to in the other picture, it doesn't have wings. And that was the Bracciano collection, which is the old Osaki collection in Bracciano Castle. It all adds up. More information here, mentioning the first drawing of the famous Correggio. It says first because that means more. So you have the first and the second, like you have the two versions of the School of Love. But these are little parts of documents that we're left to use to tell the tale, tell the story. The Ayu versions. Here on the top, we have the Vienna version. We have an engraving of the Vienna version. But below, here are all the depictions of the Orleans version. And we even have a picture of when it was hung next to the leader before it was stolen. The Ayu variant version has so many drawings, pictures and engravings of existence, showing it not a slender trimmed down picture but a wider proportion picture. It has so much evidence of its existence, and now I'll show you the variant details that show its difference between the original Vienna version. On the left we have the Vienna version, an engraving of the Vienna version. On the right we have two engravings of the lost Io version before it was mutilated. And we can see that Zeus is coming down, and as he comes through the cloud, his face is facing more forward and direct out towards the viewer. Whereas in the Vienna version, Zeus is not coming forward more towards the viewer. He's more just coming side on towards Io, and it's a side-on looking face as opposed to a front-looking face. And the tree area is very different in the variant engravings as opposed to the Vienna version. And funny enough, there is a fork tree. This shows the difference in the face. She was repainted, her face, and that is after the mutilations. This just shows you the difference of her prior to she was cut and after she was cut. Her face is very different. So, right, this is a real good one. On the original version, we see a lot of branches around the pots and a different looking deer. Whereas when we go to the variant version, it's just a different deer. The deer is consistent throughout all of these variant versions, the same variant, whereas the two Vienna versions there are the same. And if you look around the pot, it doesn't have all that branch work, and the whole floor area around the river is quite different compared to the Vienna version. But let's look closer at this deer because there's more to see. So look at the eyes in the variant. These eyes all the way through, yeah? It's the same eye, it's the same mouth, it's quite a elongated long stretch of position of the deer, whereas the Vienna version is a more bulkier, direct, and if you look at his eye, it's quite large compared to the variant version. So what you're seeing here is the deer depicted many times in the many depictions of the variant, because the variant was so famous because it was part of the famous collection, as opposed to the Vienna version. This is the variant Io we have. We see a difference in the trees. The variant Io has this fork tree consistently, whereas the Vienna version, the fork tree is covered in mist and cloud. You can see that under the foot of the Vienna version of Io, she has some rocks. And in the engravings and depictions of the variant version, she doesn't have the rocks. So this shows another subtle difference in the variants. The Ganymede versions. Well, we have the original Ganymede, which is in Vienna, which has definitely been trimmed down along with its counterpart Io, and that shows that they were once part of Federico's Ovid Metamorphosis room. And here, have a look at the version that I found in Bordeaux. It matches the original drawing and it has the correct proportion, and any copy of Ganymede represents the Vienna version, but this version alone matches the sizes, proportion of the Io variant. If you didn't know, you'd think, well, bloody hell, you found it. I've checked it, the quality is not Correggio. It's a copy that was made I'm sure, just to bridge the gap to make it a complete collection. Who the copy was done for, I don't know that yet, but it's very interesting. So here I'll show an example. There is the IO variant, larger proportion than the IO that's in Vienna that matches this Ganymede. But this Ganymede, you can see the proportion is very different to the IO, same as if this IO was matching with, as we show with the Vienna IO. If you look at this Ganymede that I found, the proportion matches. So why do I bring this up? I'm not showing you that a variant exists of Ganymede. I'm just showing you that a copy exists of Ganymede that may have just filled in the gap. And I don't know whose gap it would have been, whether it was Christina's gap, the old Ilsaki gap. I don't believe it was the Orleans, but it could have been. Who knows? Maybe I'll find that answer out. But it's interesting to address. So these are the 6 mythologicals you need to be aware of in understanding art's greatest mysteries. The centre of art history points to Antonio Allegri de Correggio, and them 6 works are the centre of it all, and even above them 6 works is the 2 main ones, my painting and the Leader and the Swan. That is why my Cupid painting is the most important painting in history. Sit back, enjoy this ride that's about to unfold. Nobody saw this coming, but I've been working on it, and I'm ready to share it with everybody.